Hey there, everyone. My name is Michelle Cachat. I am the author of a brand new book called Relentless, The Unshakable Presence of a God Who Never Leaves. And today I'm talking about why you and I can't wait to wrestle with our faith. There's a lot of people who think spiritual conversations and wrestling with the meaning of life and purpose and the possibility of faith is a waste of time. And I'm of the belief that whether you are a believer or not a believer, whether you have a strong faith or not, that we can't afford to not spend time wrestling with that question. And it's absolutely essential that we do that. And I'm going to give you basically three reasons why we absolutely must not wait to wrestle with this whole question of our faith. But to give you a little background, my parents became Christians when I was only a few months old. And so literally for the majority of my life, I've not lived a day without knowing about Jesus in some way, shape, or form. And the Christian faith, following Jesus, knowing him, loving him, has been a huge part of my entire life. I'm 48 years old. That's a long time. However, I hadn't really gotten very clear about why I believe what I believe. Then, when things started to fall apart, when life happened, when crises happened, when suffering happened, my anchor didn't hold. Because I hadn't spent very much time really getting clear about what I believe and why I believe it, then when the rug was pulled out from under me, I really wrestled with my faith. So to give you a little background, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'd always dreamed of being married and having a family and having kids. That was kind of my ideal. And then all of a sudden, one day in December, when I was 27 years old, I was holding my 1.5-year-old child and I watched my husband drive away for the last time. Just that fast, I became a single mom, 27 years old, with no idea what I was going to do, no idea how that could happen. It's not what I planned on. And then about the time that I thought I was getting a leg up on that challenge, that crisis, then I decided to get married again to a wonderful man named Troy, who I'm still married to. However, I dove right in at 29 years of age, right, almost 30, into blended family and step family. Now, family parenting is hard anyway, but you do blended family and step family, and let me tell you, oh my goodness, nothing is going to challenge your sense of sanity and strength and even your sense of being a fairly good parent until you get into a step family, blended family situation. And then it's like, everything that you knew about being a mom and a wife goes out the window and you kind of have to figure out from scratch. So that was its own challenge. And then about the time that I thought I had mastered that and we were getting through that challenge, that difficulty, then on a Tuesday in November in 2010, I got a phone call from my doctor who let me know that I had cancer of the tongue, squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue. Now, what you need to know is I had a career built on communication, right? Career built on communication. So having my speech impacted was huge. But it wasn't what at that initial diagnosis, it was a best case scenario. But that wasn't the end of my struggle. Over the next several years, cancer would come back 2 more times, each more serious and significant than the time before. And by the third time, the doctors didn't make any promise of a cure. They didn't make me any guarantees that I would be okay. And in fact, they told me to get my affairs in order. I had 2 weeks to get everything together, and I immediately went into a 9-hour surgery that removed 2/3 of my tongue, cut up a bunch of my body in order to piece me back together again. And then following that, I went through an intensive chemotherapy and radiation treatment that literally took me to the edge of death. And the doctor said, we need to basically kill you and then bring you back to life in the hope of you having any life at all. And so in the years after that, as I learned to live as a woman with a permanent functional disability and with chronic pain and everything else, is I had to decide what I believed. I had grown up knowing about Jesus. I had grown up believing that God was real and that God was good and that God could be trusted. And then, but then I find myself in my late 30s and early 40s wrestling with crisis after crisis after crisis, and dealing with unbelievable suffering and unbelievable losses. And I couldn't get my faith, the math of my faith, to add up. Okay? And this is why it's so important, because what I basically came to understand is that although I did believe in Jesus, although I did have a faith in a very real God, it was a transactional faith. I believe that I wanted to do A, B, and C. If I was a good girl and did all the right things and was a good person and followed the law and didn't break the speed limit and obeyed all the rules, then God was on the hook to give me a good life. And then when my life didn't turn out to be good, then either I had failed or he had. There had to be one or the other in order for the math to add up. And so in that place, my faith was wrecked. Transactional faith doesn't work. And for those of you who don't believe, or those of you who do, sooner or later, you're going to have to decide not only what you believe about God, but also what you believe about suffering and pain. You not only need a theology of faith, a theology of belief, but you also need a theology of suffering. Because if you don't have a theology of suffering, then you're going to have a math equation that's not always going to add up. You're going to believe that if you love God and are a good person, then you should have a good life. And life doesn't work out that way. And so ultimately, you and I have to wrestle with this. We have to, as my good friend Kim told me this week, we have to contend with the realities of a life that doesn't always go according to plan, and this belief in a good God. And what are we going to do when those seem to be oil and water and they don't mix? They don't seem to go together. Well, I have found a lot of good, solid counsel and guidance in a story in the Old Testament of the Bible. There's this story about Joshua, a Jordan River, and a bunch of people who were doing their best to follow God, okay? They had just come out of, at this point, this is in the book of Joshua, chapter 3 and 4, they had just come out of a season of slavery, 400 years. So we're talking generations that had known nothing but slavery in Egypt. So talk about some pretty intense suffering. In fact, history will tell you that the Egyptians treated the Hebrews, the Jewish people, the Israelites, brutally. Okay, and that they were mired in intense suffering. God had delivered them from that suffering, okay? And he was taking them to a new country, a place that the Bible calls the Promised Land. So I think of it in terms of my own life. I had come through really unexpected, painful divorce, single motherhood pain. God had delivered me from those years of, I would call, to some extent, an abusive relationship, okay? In some definition of the word. God had delivered me, okay? And he was taking to me what I believed was going to be my promised land, okay? I believed it was in this life that I was going to have this promised land. So imagine Joshua and the Israelites headed to their promised land, and they bump up against this Jordan River. Now, when we talk about the Jordan River, it wasn't a tiny little creek, it wasn't a stream, it was a raging river, and it was harvest time. And whenever it's harvest time at the Jordan River, the river ran at flood stage. That means it was overflowing its banks. I live in Colorado. We're very familiar with whitewater rafting here. And when the rivers are at flood stage, nobody even whitewater rafts because it's so dangerous. It is so very, very dangerous. So this is the Jordan River. And the thing is that it's such a big river and it's running at flood stage. The promised land is on the other side. But Joshua and the Israelites are on this side. And they're like, hello, God, you promised to deliver us. You promised us a promised land. You told us that you had something better for us. We just came out of this season of horrific abuse and slavery. Now you're taking us to this promised land. But there's a river here. What are we going to do? So this is what I want to read to you. This is what happened, and this is so critical. The Lord said to Joshua, this is chapter 3, verse 7, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of Israel so that they may know that I am with you. This is how you will know that the living God is among you. This is down in verse 10. Okay? Now then, choose 12 men among you. He says in verse 11, see, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. The ark of the covenant was, any of you watched Raiders of the Lost Ark? The ark of the covenant was this actual chest, this ark, this container that was the visible evidence of God's presence, okay? The visible evidence of God's presence with the Israelites. They would look to that as a reminder that God was with them, okay? So God is telling them, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Okay, so the ark's going to go into the water first. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. As soon as the priests who carried the ark of the Lord set foot in the Jordan River, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. Okay. Then we skip down to, let's see. We'll just at 15. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge. So the moment that their toes touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap at a great distance away, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground. Okay? Water stops, heaps up at a great distance, like somebody built a dam in a second, right? But there is no dam. God cut the water off. The priests are in the middle of the Jordan riverbed, but now they're on dry ground because God can not only stop the flow of the Jordan, but he can turn it into dry ground just like that. And then while the priests are stopped in the middle of the Jordan, they stood on dry ground, all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground, okay? This is so important, okay? So there was this impossible circumstance. God cut off the Jordan, piled up the waters at a distance. The priests are standing in the middle with the ark, okay? Think Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ark of the Covenant in the middle, tangible evidence of God's presence. And all of the Israelites, we're talking thousands of them, walked through the Jordan River on the dry riverbed to the other side, okay? Remember, God's taking them to their promised land. But God's not done yet, all right? This is what's so important. When the whole nation had crossed over, this is what God said. Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. Okay? In other words, the priests are still in the middle of the Jordan. All of Israel has passed over. He takes 12 men, tells them to go back to the center where the priests are standing, pick up 12 stones, put them on their shoulders, carry them to the side where they are now, on the promised land side of the Jordan River. So Joshua did this. He called them all together. He tells them, each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. This is what I want you to listen to, okay? This is the purpose. God never has us do things without having a purpose to them, without having meaning to them. To serve as a sign among you, this is chapter 4, verse 6. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. Okay, so this is what happens. They get through this precarious circumstance, this very dangerous, scary circumstance of a raging Jordan River, all right? When they get to the other side, God says, you're not done yet. I want you to go back to the middle of the raging river that you just came through. I want you to pick out 12 stones that you would have never had access to if it wasn't for my presence with you in the middle of it. I want you to bring them over to this side of the Jordan, and I want you to set them up as an altar. 12 stones. All right, so they went. Here's some stones right here. I have some. These aren't nearly big enough because it says in the Bible that they had to carry it on their shoulders. So they were probably multiple times bigger than this, okay? But he told them to bring them over to the side of the Jordan and to set them up like this on the side of the Jordan River, 12 of them, okay, big old stones, as a visible reminder of what God's presence accomplished for them, okay? In other words, this is what he was saying. In the future, when your children ask you what these stones means, in other words, in the future, when life goes crazy again, when circumstances happen outside of your control, when the bottom falls out, when the rug is pulled out from under you, I want you to have an altar to remind you of what got you through the last hard thing. The last hard thing the Israelites went through was that Jordan River. And he goes, I want you to be able to come back and visibly look at these 12 stones that you would have never seen, never been able to pick up and carry, never even had access to, if it wasn't for the ark of my presence that made a way through that river. And if I did it for you that time, I'm going to do it for you again. Now, why does this matter? Why does this matter? Okay. The first reason this matters, my friends, is because the first thing that we have to wrestle with is the stakes. What is at stake? At that day at the Jordan River, what the Israelites thought was at stake was the Jordan River, their ability to cross it. And God wanted them to know that what was at stake was not the river, not their inability to cross it, not even what was up ahead. What was at stake is their confidence in the goodness, the faithfulness, and the power of their God. That was what was at stake. It was their faith. Their faith was at stake. It's their belief that was at stake. One of my favorite stories in the Bible right now is in the New Testament. It's Jesus talking to Peter. It is after the Last Supper, before the crucifixion. Jesus knows what is coming down the pipe. The disciples think they've already dealt with some really hard things, and Jesus knows that the harder thing is coming. He's going to be arrested. He's going to have an unfair trial. He's going to be tortured and beaten and mutilated, and then he's going to be crucified, and he's going to die. He knows that what is at stake right now is far bigger than anything they've faced before, and he looks at Peter in that moment. He knows what's coming. Peter does not, and this is what Jesus says to him. Simon, Simon, Peter, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Peter. And by the way, right there at that moment, don't you want to know what Jesus is praying for? When everything is at stake, when the bottom is about to fall out, when the worst case scenario is about to happen, okay? This is Peter at the door of a doctor's office. This is Peter not knowing where his firstborn is. This is Peter whose marriage is in crisis, okay? I'm just making some analogies. This is all of us at that moment of crisis. And Jesus is saying, Peter, I have prayed for you. And I'm saying, okay, Jesus, what are you praying for? And this is what he says. Peter, I have prayed for you that your faith would not fail. That your faith would not fail. In other words, he's saying, Peter, I have prayed for you that when the worst happens, that you would be able to go back and see the stack of stones by your Jordan River, that your faith would not fail, that you would remember the presence, faithfulness, and power of your God to carry you through. I have prayed for you that your faith would not fail. My friends, what is at stake in our lives right now isn't the person that's sick that we love. Isn't the doctor's diagnosis that we're waiting for. It isn't the job that we need. It isn't the paycheck that we're waiting for. It isn't a bill that hasn't been paid. It isn't a relationship that has fallen apart. All those things are horrible and difficult. But what is most at stake today for you and I both, regardless of where we're at in our road of belief, is our faith. You see, if we anchor ourselves to anything that is within ourselves, if we anchor ourselves to our own ability, if we anchor ourselves to our own ability to control our lives, if we anchor ourselves to our relationships, to our roles as a spouse or a parent or a good employee or a smart individual or a talent, if we anchor ourselves to anything within ourselves, we will fail. A boat anchored to itself is not anchored at all. In order for us to truly be anchored, we have to be anchored to something that resides outside of ourselves and that is bigger, stronger, more powerful than ourselves. That is why our faith is at stake. So we need to know our stakes, but we also need to know the purpose of this whole exercise. Why did God have them put up stones, altar stones on the side of the Jordan? The reason he had them put up stones at the side of the Jordan is he knew it would not be the last time something hard would happen. He knew it would not be the last time. So after I came through the divorce and single motherhood, I thought, okay, I've had my share of hard things. Surely I have done enough. Surely life will be easy going from here. And I just laughed because I had no idea how much worse it could get. I mean, certainly being a single mom and going through an unexpected divorce and having my dream shattered was hard, but it was going to get harder. And God knew that I needed to shore up my faith and have tangible reminders of God's presence for what was yet to come. And I know even today, at 48 years of age, after having gone through more than 2 decades of really hard things, that there will still be more hard things to come. And he is telling me even now to go back into my Jordan River, to pull out stones that remind me of his faithfulness in those hard things, and to set them up as an altar right now. So whatever may come will not destroy my faith. That's the purpose of this, for us to build up our faith now, so that way it is anchored out of the reach of our circumstances. Out of the reach of our circumstances. The stakes of our faith. The purpose is to strengthen our faith. And then the reward, you know what the reward is? The reward is to live with the kind of peace and joy and laughter that exists outside the reach of our circumstances. Oh my gosh. Who doesn't want that? You and I, peace is a rare commodity these days. There are very few people we run into that truly have a sense of peace. And I believe it's because our peace has been anchored to things that are far too small. Far too small. And so when pain happens, when suffering happens, when loss happens, we find out we are not anchored at all because we were anchored to things far too small. This is the reward. When you and I know the stakes, understand the purpose of contending with our faith, then we end up having a life that is not without pain and tears and grief, but we live a life where our peace is anchored outside the reach of our circumstances. And that, my friends, is priceless. Absolutely priceless. Yesterday, I received a text from a friend, and she's had her own share of suffering, and for the sake of her privacy, I won't go into details, but she has had suffering upon suffering upon suffering upon suffering. And she's had a few people let her know that if she believed enough, if she had faith enough, those things wouldn't happen. And she wrote me wrestling, because there's this wrestling of, is that true? Am I lacking faith? Do I not believe enough? Is that why I'm still in pain? And my friends, first of all, we need to understand that we have falsely equated the presence of pain with the absence of God. And pain and God are not mutually exclusive. That God's presence is where the pain is. God's presence has always been where the pain is. That's what the incarnation is about God sending Jesus, his son, to come in the flesh, to put on pain in order to be with us, because God's presence is where the pain is. But we also have lost our theology of pain and suffering. And like I told her yesterday, if we think that pain and suffering is the worst thing that can happen, then yes, then we are going to need to name it and claim it theology. We're going to need to believe that we can name it and believe enough and then control our circumstances. But if we believe that the worst thing that can happen to us is not our pain, but is the loss of our faith, then we also understand the presence of our pain and suffering can actually build up our faith more than anything else. if we truly believe that what is at stake here is our faith, then even when the worst happens, it can only serve to strengthen us. It can only serve to anchor our faith outside the reach of our circumstances. If we truly say we believe what we believe, if we truly believe there is life after this life, then it only gets better for us from here, no matter how bad it gets in this life. You and I can't wait to wrestle with our faith. We must wrestle with it now. Because whether you're in the middle of a hard thing, coming out of a hard thing, or in the middle of a relatively easy life, it's just a matter of time before you're going to have to face your own mortality. Every one of us must wrestle with our mortality because none of us gets out of this alive. We must decide what we believe. And when that happens, when we come butt up against our Jordan rivers, we're going to have to decide if we believe the presence of God is with us or not. And as if he is with us, then he has everything it takes to get us through to the other side. If we don't believe he's with us, then we have every reason to scramble and panic and be afraid. But if we carry the presence of God with us, if we believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is our hope and that the gospel is real, then all we have to do is put our toes into the water and he is going to make sure that we can get through to the other side. That doesn't mean we won't have losses. It doesn't mean we won't have pain. But it will mean that we won't be alone in it. And so in the pages of this book, I talk about how you can set up your own 12 altar stones, how you can go into the middle of your Jordan River, how you can go into the center of your Jordan River, the last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years of your life, how you can look for evidence of God's presence in the middle of your most harrowing circumstances, and how you can find stones of his presence, metaphorical stones or physical stones, it doesn't matter, but how you can find evidence of his presence with you, carry them out from the murky middle of your Jordan River and set them up as an altar at the side of your life. And the reason you and I mustn't wait to do this is we have no idea what's to come later today or tomorrow. But if you and I can do the hard work of setting up altars of God's presence right here, right now, evidence of his presence from our first breath until this current moment, then no matter what comes, we can go back to those altars. We can see the evidence of God with us. And we can be reminded that no matter how raging the storms are all around us, we can still be anchored to his peace because he is with us every step of the way. So this is what I want you to do. First of all, I want you to at least make a decision today that you are not going to wait to contend with your faith. What you believe about this life and the life to come is so important, far more important than you know. I pray that none of you faces a life-threatening diagnosis or a loss or a hard circumstance today or tomorrow. I pray that none of you do. I have no wish for anybody to have pain. But this life is unpredictable and hard things happen. And that's my first challenge to you, is make a decision today that this question of faith is far too important for you to put it off any longer. Okay? Number two, I want you to decide if you want to live anchored to yourself and your own ability to build a good life, or you want to be anchored to something bigger than you. Okay? That's the purpose of this exercise. And then if you are someone who wants to anchor yourself to something bigger than yourself, then I challenge you. I challenge you to do the work of digging out evidence of God's presence from the middle of your Jordan River. Because whether you can see him or reach for him or not, he is real, he is good, and he's with you. And he wants you to know more than anything that his love for you is big enough to carry you through the worst this life has to offer. And if it would be helpful to you, okay, if it would be helpful to you, if not, then you just push delete and you can go ahead and move on. But if it would be helpful for you, I want you to go buy this book right now. It's a relatively low investment for wrestling with this life and the life to come. Go get this book Find a friend or two to do it with you. And the 2 of you, or the 3 of you, or the 10 or 12 of you, I want you to walk through the journey of these 12 chapters. And by the end, I want you to set up an altar of God's presence in your story, right here, right now. And I want you to take a picture of it. Oh, this would just delight me to no end. Take a picture of that altar, whether it's a box of knickknacks that you've collected, whether it's several cards. We've actually put together altar stone cards that you can get on my website. You can go to my website and get those, but altar stone cards where you can write down the tangible evidence of God's presence with you. But I want you to set up your altar stones on the side of your Jordan River as a testimony to God's faithfulness, presence, and power in your life. And I pray with all of my heart, Jesus, make it so that that altar of God's presence with you would secure your faith no matter what comes. Because, my friend, what is at stake here? Like Jesus said to Peter, I have prayed for you that your faith would not fail. Jesus, that is my prayer for my brothers and my sisters right now, God. That whatever comes, whatever they're dealing for right now, that you would show yourself to them. Show yourself, help them to see glimmers of your presence with them, even right now. That their faith would be strengthened, that their peace would be secured, and even though they may cry long into the night, God, that they would know without a shadow of the doubt that they are not alone, that you are with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Remember, I want to see your pictures of what God is doing in your life. Because when you and I share our altar stones with each other, we strengthen each other's faith. And it makes this life so much easier to not have to do it alone. Much love.